Welcome to this explainer brought to you by Forge College. I'm really thrilled you're tuning in today. So, in our previous lesson, we laid out the core principles of advanced security techniques for smart contract wallets. We talked a lot about the theory of keeping things safe. But today we are getting incredibly practical. We're going to take those advanced security principles and actually use them to design a robust, role-based access control system for multisig wallets. We're literally building the blueprints you need to lock down your protocols. And trust me, you are definitely going to want these blueprints. Okay, let's just kick things off with a simple question. Imagine a brand new intern walks into your office on their very first day, and you just hand them the master keys. The keys to the company vault, the server room, the CEO's office, the whole shebang. Sounds absolutely insane, right? Well, believe it or not, that is exactly what happens in a smart contract with a flat ownership structure. When every key holder in a multisig has full, universal power across the board, you are essentially handing out master keys to everyone. Yes, even that first-day intern. It's a massive security risk, and it really highlights the urgent need for a much more granular, carefully designed security blueprint. So here is our engineering schematic for today. 1. Welcome to access control. 2. The 3 essential roles. 3. Coding the role manager. 4. Testing and revoking access. And finally, 5. Securing the multisig vault. Let's get right into it. All right, section 1. Welcome to access control. Moving beyond the master key. Think of your smart contract system like a highly secure, modern factory. Your employees don't just get a universal skeleton key to walk wherever they want. They get specific electronic key cards. The worker on the loading dock gets a key card that opens the warehouse, but it absolutely does not open the executive boardroom, right? Well, this brings us to role-based access control, or RBAC for short. Basically, it means assigning specific execution capabilities to named roles rather than just directly to individual wallet addresses. This concept physically encodes what we call the principle of least privilege. By giving an actor only the absolute minimum authority they need to do their job, you drastically reduce the blast radius if their account ever gets compromised. To really see the value here, let's put the old way right next to the new way. On one side, we've got raw owner lists. This is where everyone on the list just has total, unmitigated control. It's an outdated, high-risk approach. It's like leaving the vault door wide open. On the other side, we have named roles. Now, this is a modern, modular approach where authority is delegated and strictly constrained. Look, if a multisig wallet is out there executing complex operations across different DeFi protocols, you absolutely must have this granular, delegable, and revocable system in place. There's really no way around it. Moving right along, section 2, the 3 essential roles, the keycard hierarchy. Okay, so we need to break down the specific permission tiers for our factory's keycard hierarchy, because let's face it, not all roles are created equal, and defining them clearly is really half the battle. We've broken this down into 3 essential roles. First up, the admin. Think of them as the factory CEO. They manage the critical configurations, and they're the ones assigning or revoking other roles. This role should usually be held by a governance multisig or maybe a time lock, and it needs to be highly restricted. Next, we have the operator. This is your day-to-day floor worker. They perform the routine operations, like executing daily transfers. It's typically held by operational signers with a very limited specific scope. And finally, the recovery role. Think of this as your emergency security team. Their sole job, literally their only job, is to revoke or freeze compromised roles and trigger recovery flows. They don't actually have the power to move funds themselves, only to stop bad things from happening. It's basically an escrowed emergency key. All right, on to section 3, coding the role manager, drafting the schematics. So we've got the theory down, and we've got our hierarchy. Now it's time to actually draft the schematics and turn our conceptual keycards into immutable code. To build this digital ledger and the enforcement mechanism behind it, we're going to need 4 critical Solidity building blocks. We need bytes32 role identifiers, which basically just name our roles. We need nested membership mappings to track who exactly holds what. We need only role access modifiers to act as the bouncers at the door of our functions. And absolutely crucially, we need on-chain state events. That way the outside world can see exactly when a keycard is issued, or more importantly, revoked. Now, the really critical point is this specific line of code. This mapping is basically the beating heart of our role manager. It's a nested mapping, and honestly, it's pretty brilliant. Think of it like a giant, highly secure spreadsheet. The first column is the bytes32 role identifier, which, by the way, is just a catcheck 256 hash of a string like, say, operator. The second column is the specific wallet address. And then that final cell, it simply contains a Boolean, true or false. True, they have the keycard. False, they don't. It's beautifully simple, it's incredibly gas efficient, and it's perfectly secure. So now that we have our storage spreadsheet, we obviously need functions to update it, right? The admin uses grant role to give someone power. The recovery team uses revoke role to take it away. And I want you to notice something really important here. We absolutely must emit role granted and role revoked events. Why? Because off-chain auditing tools, dashboards, security monitors, they all rely entirely on these events to understand the state of your system. If you aren't emitting events, your access control changes are basically happening completely in the dark. Let's dive in to Section 4, Testing and Revoking Access, Stress Testing the System. Look, building a security system without stress testing it is kind of like building a submarine and just never putting it in the water. It doesn't make any sense. We need to imagine a worst-case scenario here. What if an operator accidentally drops their electronic keycard in the factory parking lot and a malicious actor scoops it up? Well, here's exactly how we prove our system can handle that. Step 1, we compile and deploy our contract locally using a tool like Hardhat or Foundry. Step 2, we test what we call the happy path. We just verify that the admin can successfully grant the operator role and the operator can actually do their job. But step 3 is really the most vital part, the revocation flow. We explicitly write a test where the recovery address steps in, freezes the operator, and we mathematically prove on-chain that the compromised keycard no longer works. When you're looking at your tests, you want to see this specific contrast. When the authorized operator makes a delegated call, it should just return, okay, smooth sailing. But when that dropped keycard is used after being revoked, or when some random stranger tries to call the function, the transaction must revert with exactly this phrase, role manager access denied. When you're writing these tests, remember to actively change your signer context, like using vm.prank if you're in Foundry, for instance, and use expect revert to guarantee that those vault doors slam shut exactly when they are supposed to. I just want to pause for a second on this integration best practice. Avoid duplicating role logic across contracts to reduce mismatch risk. What does that actually mean? Well, if you have 3 different modules in your multisig, they shouldn't all have their own custom, slightly different ways of checking roles. No way. They should all point back to your single, centralized role manager. As you'll discover in some of the other advanced learning tracks here at Forge College, smart contract architecture relies really heavily on composability. Keep your role logic in one central place and just let your other contracts query it. And finally, Section 5, Securing the Multisig Vault, Final Inspection. All right, we've drafted the schematics, we've written the code, and we've stress-tested the revocation flows. Let's quickly summarize the key takeaways from today's explainer. First, always separate your high-privilege admins from your daily operational rules. Second, isolate your recovery authority so you can quickly freeze compromised accounts, but without actually giving that recovery team the power to drain the vault themselves. And third, rely on transparent on-chain events so you have a perfectly auditable trail. If you build your role manager correctly, a compromised operator doesn't mean the whole system goes down. It just means the recovery team pushes a button and the threat is neutralized immediately. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought to chew on. We've built an incredible revocation system today, but how will these recovery roles actually interact with on-chain emergency time locks? I mean, if an admin wants to upgrade the vault, how do we give the recovery team enough time to stop them if that admin turns out to be malicious? Now, that is a fascinating puzzle, and it's exactly what we're going to tackle in our next lesson, implementing emergency stop patterns. Until then, I highly encourage you to visit forge.college to continue your Web3 security journey, explore our other resources, and really master the art of smart contract architecture. Keep building, keep learning, and I will see you in the next explainer.